Can you imagine anger without sin? Now, to be honest, most of anger that you and I have is really off of God's mark. In fact, the Bible also says that the anger of mankind does not lead to the righteousness of God. And yet, in his writing to the church in Ephesus here, Paul says, in your anger, do not sin, which means there is an anger to be had that is not off of the mark. Now, one of the reasons this is so hard to define is because our anger is so often off the mark, and we're just trying to justify our own anger. But when we look at God, when we look at Jesus, we get a hint at those times when he got, if you would, a little riled. And it looked like he is angry. And yet we know he was without sin. What were those situations? Well, in every situation, it seems, it's when he came across leaders, especially religious leaders, whose job it was to teach the people, whose job it was to protect the people, whose job it was to make sure that the poor and the downtrodden received justice. Not only did not do their job, but they took advantage of them. It's this that Christ gets hot on the collar. Just like when he walked in the temple and he saw that this was a time for all God's people to come to his temple and to buy lambs and to worship God and the Passover. And instead, the religious leaders had turned this into a huge profit-making scheme right there in the house of prayer. And Jesus is mad, angry, but righteously so. And though he turns over tables and he chases out animals, he doesn't hit anyone. He doesn't murder anyone. And his words aren't personal. His words are for the heart of God. That this is not to be a house of thieves where you take advantage of the people, but rather a house of prayer where the people can have free access to God. Now, there's a lot going on in our world right now that is causing anger. And again, to be honest, most of the anger isn't anger. It's hatred. And that is not God's kind of anger. But there is an anger when you look and say, you know what, the very people who are supposed to protect us, not all of them, but some of them, the very people who are to make sure that the downtrodden get rights that others may trample on, when they take advantage of them, when they're the abusers, I think there's a place for righteous anger. But we must be careful. It's God's kind of anger, which is why he gives us two clues. The first is, don't let the sun go down on your anger. In other words, it's not something that festers and grows, because that will turn into hatred. That will turn into missing the mark with your words and your deeds. The second thing that he says is to make sure that you don't give the enemy a foothold. Because you know he's trying to twist things. We may start out on the right path. This is not right. We need to make it right. But then words are said from this side and someone takes up a position on that side or accuses of this. And then all of a sudden that righteous anger becomes unrighteous anger. And the enemy gets a foothold and we begin to turn onto each other. And not only now are we talking about the injustice on one individual, we're talking about the injustices to businesses and good police officers and people of all kinds of race and color and creeds and whatnot, because we let the enemy get a foothold. The people of God should be moved like God is by issues of justice. But we must be really careful that from that place is sorrow for both sides and their brokenness with God, love for both sides and their restoration with God, and wanting to see true justice and not some place to put our anger. I hope that this is the kind of justice we could seek in this time, not leading into hatred and unrighteous anger. Put your eyes on Jesus, and daily, especially in this time, may you walk in the dust of the Master.